Thank you, Tom. Okay, let me hand back to you now, Ellie, to take the decision which I support and which will now be displayed on the screen.
In terms of the decision to be made today, I approve the recommendations as set out in the report.
Thank you, Ellie. So on to agenda item 16, allotments, rents and water charges. Ellie, you're going to introduce this report.
Thank you. Bristol is a leading city in terms of our approach to sustainable food growing and food equality. Everyone recognises the importance of a thriving network of accessible spaces for local people to grow healthy and sustainable food. A key focus of the Parks and Green Spaces and Food Growing and Allotment Strategy is to expand opportunities for collective and community food growing. In the previous strategic investment paper, we are pledging considerable money towards food growing opportunities. Fees have not been raised for over 5 years. The Mayor drew out the financial pressures faced by local government at the start of the meeting, and these pressures are real and are having an impact on every area of local government activity, from adult social care to children's centres, the work we're doing on climate change to libraries, waste collection, road maintenance, and they have a pressure on the park service, including our allotments. Current allotment rent does not meet the cost of running the current service, let alone deliver the service that we all want to see. Currently, the park service covers the shortfall in allotment revenues, reducing our citywide offer. This means allotments are effectively subsidised by other council revenue, which is not financially sustainable or fair. These proposals still don't break even, but allow us to invest in the service and improve our offer, while reducing pressure on the parks budget so that all residents can benefit from quality parks and green spaces that we maintain. The increased income from rent rises will improve the service by funding additional staff, bringing more land into food production, new collective growing opportunities and a more frequent preventative repairs programme. Any rent increase comes into effect in 12 months' time. We listen to feedback and have staggered the increase, meaning the full increase will not be in place for several years, allowing tenants even longer to prepare for the changes, and a full 8 years after our last uplift in 2018 in the face of austerity, the cost of operating crisis and increased demand. We are expanding discounts so that now those in receipt of council tax reduction, housing benefit, universal credit and pension credit will be able to access a 50% discount for their allotment. Groups offering social value will also benefit too, with a 50% discount. We had over 3,000 consultation responses and we've listened to the feedback, demonstrated by not taking forward changes to the tenancy rules and with the staggered uplift. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie. So we've given 30 minutes to this public forum because of the number of contributions. So we've had 31 public forum statements. So 1 minute per statement to fit within our 30 minutes. And I'll just go through the names and Tim will help me keep time. Okay, Sarah Freeman. Can you wait for the microphone there, Sarah? And I'll put my hand up when you're at 50 seconds, just so you're aware, okay?
The council is looking at staggering a 100% rent increase over 2 years. This is unacceptable. The council keeps stating there's been no rise in rents since 2018. That is their fault. The 1950 Allotments Act, Section 10(1), states an allotment shall be let at such rent as a tenant may reasonably be expected to pay for the land. What the council are proposing is not reasonable. The council mentions it needs to bring more overgrown plots into cultivation. I hope they do not expect allotment holders to do this for them. If allotment rents rise by 50%, the council risk the goodwill from allotment holders that currently exists. You should be asking yourself what the consequences will be of the above inflation rent increase. I urge the council...
Just 1 moment, 1 minute.
I urge the council to rethink their proposed changes to the Bristol allotment rent rises. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you. Debbie Wyatt. Debbie Wyatt. Okay. Holly Wyatt. Okay, Holly, I'll put my hand up when you're at 50 seconds, okay?
Thank you. Alongside the Council's online consultation process, I began an online petition via change.org, which has been submitted to Democratic Services. At the time of submission, this petition had reached over 6,414 signatures of support, with 3,965 being verified as from Bristol residents. As such, this petition will be going to the next full council meeting for debate, but I felt it was important to highlight at this cabinet meeting the volume of support this petition has received. One of the core demands in this petition was that access to space to grow your own food should be for everyone and not the reserve of more affluent households. Over 6,000 people agreed with this statement, and I would strongly urge the council not to ignore the voices of those they have been elected to represent. These rent increases will absolutely make allotments unaffordable for some of those who can most benefit from access to space to grow their own food, and the impact of these proposals will disproportionately affect the poorest residents of our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Bosanquet. Tom Bosanquet. Or quoi? No, okay. Sue Allen. Ruth Hecht.
In your Parks and Green Spaces strategy, you say you want a fairer approach to tenancy fees, yet clearly the proposed rental increases, which mean people will pay anything from 7% to 492% more, are anything but fair. Your figures are completely illogical and no explanation has been given as to how these random sums were arrived at. In your strategy, you say you want collaboration and an open dialogue with stakeholders and communities. I've emailed both Councillor King and Jonathan James on behalf of the Bristol Allotmenteers Resist campaign for a meeting to discuss solutions. I've had no response. This doesn't feel very collaborative. I fully support rent increases. However, the current proposals are not the way to do it. Instead, you could raise rents by inflation, which is fair and logical, or you could charge per square metre so people pay for the actual size of their plot, which is what many local authorities
50
do.
seconds.
Or you could charge people in line with council tax. Could you tell me if you considered any of these alternative options to increasing the rents before you made the current arbitrary proposals?
Christopher Faulkner Gibson.
I fully understand that allotment rents need to increase. The fact that previous agreed increases have not been implemented is the fault of Bristol City Council and not the allotment tenants, who are now facing punitive increases to compensate for this failure. However, we want to work constructively with the Council, and we all agree that improvements are needed and must be paid for. The current staff levels are totally insufficient. We do not agree, however, with you on the principles, we agree with you on the principles, but not on the detail and the means of implementation. Your decision to phase in increases over 2 years is welcome, as is making monthly direct debit payments available, but this does not go far enough.
50 seconds.
79% of respondents to your consultation, many who live in the most deprived deciles of the city, said that they either disagreed or disagreed strongly with the rent rises. I think I'm going to be out of time now.
Yeah, thank you. So Joe Pengilly. Okay, Mara. Noreen Ratcliffe. Elise Unger. Tina Holmes. Ian McGregor. Anna Sanchez. Joanna Mellows.
Hello. I wish to speak specifically about the community groups. I'm very worried that the legal basis for the decision on them is not safe this afternoon. The consultation did not reach many of the members of the community groups because they're not local authority tenants. The Equalities Impact Assessment doesn't address the question of the community groups particularly, and the benchmarking exercise, which is an essential part of this process, there has to be evaluation in accordance with court decisions, doesn't deal with the larger plots. I'm therefore very concerned that any decision about the larger plots, that's bands E, F, G and H, would be unsafe this afternoon.
Okay, thank you. Caroline Dalog. Caroline Dallock. Kirsty Foreman. Vanessa Harvey Samuel.
I'm a tenant at Speedwell and I've had my plot for 6 years. I urge you to reconsider and withdraw the proposed rent increases. I support the case for a rent increase, but not for such a significant amount with no information as to how the money is to be spent. Your legal advice on consultation underlines the requirement to provide sufficient reasons for any proposals to permit intelligent consideration. As a consultee, I certainly do not feel I have sufficient information to permit intelligent consideration of these proposals, and I wonder whether the Cabinet has. We have been asking all through this process for information on past expenditure and plans for proposed new expenditure, to no avail. Even last week, in response to an FOI seeking the breakdown of expenditure for 22-23, the Council replied saying these figures were unavailable. In the paper before you...
Okay, that's a minute.
You have building and infrastructure costing £300,000. We don't know where that comes from. What evidence of surveying sites, prioritising work or costing work has been undertaken? How is this money to be spent? Surely this should be found out before you impose these rent increases.
Can I just say, because the reason we do give people a finite amount of time on the statements is because we have an hour-long bit, and if someone overruns, that means someone else doesn't get to speak. So I'm not going to interrupt you, but I will give you an indication your minute is now eating into another one. So that was Vanessa, right? Harriet Buckland.
Whilst I agree there's a need for rent increases, I strongly disagree with the approach to the current increases and the magnitude of those increases. The value of allotments is undervalued in terms of health and well-being, and I'm really concerned at the longevity of community groups, which will be really hard hit by these rent increases, and which other strategies claim to be offering support. That's it from me.
Thank you. Lorna Lindfield. Okay.
So this is a statement by Lorna Linfield, who's a tenant at Thingwall Park allotments. I have cancer and chronic fatigue. I'm a part-time NHS employee and I'm currently unable to work. I'm managing alone, living in a flat. I already fund my allotment rent out of household food and fuel budgets. Cancer has had a huge impact on my mental health. The allotment is the only thing in life that I positively want to get out of the flat for. The allotment means I can eat a wider range of fresh vegetables that I can't buy, get out in the sun and fresh air, do an activity without spending money, and meet like-minded people. I've already adapted my methods to my disability and low income by doing things like building irrigation channels, using no dig, accepting help from friends, and growing lower effort produce. How does the council suggest I keep my plot, given the proposed rent rises will mean I will no longer be able to pay the rent?
Thank you. Sally Wyatt. No Sally Wyatt. Okay. Tessa Price.
This is a joint statement written together by 14 community projects and groups based on allotment sites across the city. Far from bringing new opportunities for collective food growing, these rent rises will be really damaging for our projects, and they risk closing some of us down. Partly, some of us may be financially not viable anymore, we simply can't cover our costs. Some of us will have a huge amount of extra admin work created by the discount scheme that won't be manageable for us. Collectively, our projects bring huge benefits to the people of Bristol, offering a sense of community, mental and physical health benefits, connection with our food and with land. I think we probably also save the council collectively huge amounts of money across other areas, things like the reduced need for SEND provision, the reduced need for mental health support and drug and alcohol support, probably dwarfing the increased income that's going to be created by these rent rises. Most of our projects don't take a penny in funding from the council. We really don't ask for much help from the council. All we're asking is that you don't wreck what we're doing by forcing through these ill-considered proposals. Please, please don't put through these rent rises. They are going to do so much harm to our projects.
Sue Edgerly. Sue Edgerly. Elizabeth Gold. Harry Mack. Dr. Stephen Pill.
Voluntary site representatives are vital for the functioning of the allotment service, and I'm among a group of 35, half of the site reps in Bristol, who believe that the consultations on rents and rules have not been handled well. The rushed circulation of immature and ill-thought-out proposals has predictably produced needless anxiety and anger across the allotment community in Bristol. Among the consequences of this mishandling will be a scar on relationships between council and tenants lasting long into the future. In addition, cabinet members who normally spend no time thinking about allotments have been dragged into the furore and are now forced by an arbitrarily imposed timescale to make an invidious decision, either to starve allotments of additional funding by refusal or to bring a host of other problems that others will allude to by approval. So I urge Cabinet, when faced with a binary decision, to choose a third way, approve and implement the 25% increase already agreed by full council in March 2022 and require a renewed engagement with site reps and tenants in the coming months to settle the terms of a rent escalator for the coming few years.
Okay, thank you. So that's our 15 minutes for statements. So let's move on to questions. We had 45 public forum questions submitted between 27 people. We have 15 minutes for this section as well. I'll go through the names in turn. First question from Harry Mack. Kirsty Foreman. Tamara Evans-Braun. Ruth Hecht. Gillian Skinner. Oh, Ruth Hecht. Okay.
Do I ask both at once? I've got two. No, I'll ask one first. In your Parks and Green Spaces strategy, you state you want to implement a fairer and more sustainable approach to tenancy fees, and that your proposed new fees approach will take into consideration the variation in size of plots and the variation in on-site facilities, e.g. toilets and car parking. However, your new fee structure uses the same banding system as before, and there's no consideration of on-site facilities other than in relation to water and flooding discounts which already exist. How can you explain the anomaly between what you say in your strategy about new approaches and the lack of these in your proposals?
Ali?
So I guess the interesting word there for me is fair. What does fairness look like? Because not just fairness towards allotment tenants that we need to think about. I don't have the privilege of only thinking about that. I have to also think about fairness to the council, fairness to the staff that work in the allotments team, and also fairness to the rest of Bristol. Because what is happening right now is the park subsidises, as you all know, the park subsidises the allotment service to a significant amount. And where that shortfall is met by the park service, that means that something isn't delivered in our park services. And our park services are open to all. They're open to every resident in the city, and we have an obligation to make sure that those people who are our taxpayers as well are catered for. And I don't have the luxury of just catering for what is a gated community, as much as I appreciate and care about what allotmenteers do. So I guess what is fair is an interesting word for debate in that context, because it means looking at a whole range of things.
Thank you. Did you have a supplementary, or did you like to go on to your second question?
I'll ask my second question.
Okay.
So it's relevant. So we've just been talking about fairness. The rents you've proposed are totally illogical and unfair. The percentage increases are completely random and not connected to the size of the plots in any way. They're not connected to anything. For example, the percentage increases for tenants on sites with water from the smallest plot to the largest plot are going to increase in these percentages: 140%, 78, 123, 109, 66, 88, 136, 220. For no apparent reason, some people's rents will double, some are going to triple, some are quadruple, some are even going to sextuple. Can you explain how these random and illogical increases can be described as fair? So I'm not talking about being fair where the rent increases are made. I'm talking about these increases that you're proposing, which are completely bonkers.
I would just encourage to keep the questions tight so we can fit more questions into our 15 minutes, right? Because we will get to the end of that 15 minutes at some point. Okay. Yeah, Ellie.
We had to look at a lot of things. So we had to compare with some of the other authorities that have a similar land value to us, Baines, Sheffield, some of the London boroughs, those that are comparable local authorities, and Plymouth as well, amongst others, to see what they were doing and also what they're projecting to do over the coming years. So that's where a lot of our prices were compared against and rationalised against. We also had to look at some of our most popular banding, and also what we needed to achieve in terms of the target for the income that we would generate and how that would be cut across our different bands. Because, for example, Band B is our most popular plot size. It has over 50% of people are on Band B. So we needed to sort of consider that. But, a lot of the percentages that have been used and a lot of the figures that you've given us are, when you say between, a small percentage to hundreds and hundreds of percentages, but in reality, a lot of these are the price of a coffee a week. These aren't, they shouldn't be the barriers that you're suggesting they are. And just in terms of the community food growing, someone's obviously had a little word with some of you, because that is a particular passion of mine, is community food growing. I think it's one of the key solutions to food growing in the city. But they're eligible for 50% discount as well. And if there's any specific ones that are struggling, I'd just encourage you to get in touch with us, get in touch with officers, and we can deal with it on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, I mean, and I please ask I will not go. If we want to shout out, I'll just stop and we'll use that to 15 minutes. I think the point I make is if we want to enter into a discussion, and the gentleman earlier on was talking about informed, intelligent discussion, throwing words around like unhinged, whatever we just used, that these are not attached to anything, that's just not true. They are attached to a thought process. It may have produced a conclusion that you don't like, but they are attached to a process. And to suggest they're not, it does not help us move forward the argument. Again, as Ellie said, the point of fairness is one about a finite council budget in a city of increasing need, in the increasing cost of meeting those needs means that we're in a precarious situation. And there's not an area of local government activity that's not been impacted by our financial situation we're in. So addressing that context as well, and at least acknowledging it, is incredibly important. But please ask your supplementary, or we can go on to the next questioner.
I'd like to ask a supplementary.
Thank you.
I completely accept that the council needs to raise more money. So are you saying that the apparently random increases are actually based on a sort of logical sort of way of working them out, which you haven't told us about, but which you could tell us about if necessary?
Okay, so to look at the calculation of rents, we looked at the saving applied at full council in 2022, the cost of covering CPI since 2018 when allotment fees were last raised, the cost of an additional allotment officer, the minimum administration costs that should be applied, the cost of grounds maintenance, and the cost of infrastructure repairs. These were cross-analysed with a fee rate per metre squared approach and an approach based on the relative popularity of allotment plot sizes. The cost benefit was then calculated for a number of scenarios. The scenario that met the income threshold required to meet a minimum service and service investment cost level was put to public consultation.
Okay. I'll go to the next question. Gillian Skinner. No. Lauren Mason. Troy Tanska.
Hello, Marvin and Ellie King. With regard to the proposed allotment rent increases and with reference to Bristol City Council's recently released Equalities Impact Assessment, which should look at how the proposed increased allotment rents of between 7 and 492%, and we don't know why there is that variation, as my colleague mentioned, may impact on Bristol residents, including those living with intersectional disadvantages such as poor health, isolation in outlying areas, low incomes, poor local access to facilities and amenities. We need to know more about how these allotment rent increase proposals may negatively impact on take-up of allotments in the city's areas of greatest deprivation in the future, particularly on those residents with low incomes, for example, with minimum wage or low-paid jobs such as nurses, care and childcare and teaching assistants, cleaners, etc., who do not receive universal credit, pension credit, and maybe not council tax credit, and will not benefit from the proposed mitigating rent relief measures, and how this in turn could have a major effect on food poverty in these areas where fresh fruit and vegetables is often of poor quality, more expensive, or not available locally. My question is, Bristol City Council's own mapping shows that most allotment sites are in wards with the greatest food poverty and greatest social deprivation. Why has this information not been included in the Equalities Impact Assessment?
I just want to stress, as I said at the beginning, there's 15 minutes per public forum because we have items coming up around children's services on later on agenda. We've got housing papers coming up as well. If you ask a very long question, it will consume that 15 minutes. I'll say no more, but I'm going to leave it in your hands. I will not interrupt your long questions, but you will consume your time. Ellie.
So just from a factual perspective, of the 56,000 square metres that our allotments covers, only 9 square metres sits in the top 20 indices of deprivation. But again, supporting food growing amongst our most disadvantaged communities is a very clear priority, as evidenced in our approach to community food growing and the discounts that we're offering. I'm a trustee of a community garden and have been for years. This is a passion of mine. This is something I spend my weekends, my spare time working on, getting more community food growing in an area of high deprivation in Hillfields, in Bristol, in East Bristol. And the last paper I've just brought through has brought 500 grand into, which dwarfs anything that we're getting from the service, into a new kitchen garden to again grow community food growing, community-led food opportunities. So I think our commitment to that is pretty clear. But providing these allotments comes at a cost. We can't get away from that. You know, the council is subsidising this cost. Our park service is subsidising that cost. We're not immune to the cost of living, the cost of operating crisis, and that point just needs to hit home somewhere. Okay, it has to be realised that, you know, there are councils up and down the country who are applying for effective bankruptcy, and that just can't be taken for granted. So we've frozen fees since 2018 because we wanted to protect the opportunity to grow food for people. And you know, I didn't hear any objections to that. That seemed to be well supported. But we're not in a position to be able to do that anymore. And if we want to see any quality of service at all, this is what needs to happen. If there are specific individuals who are struggling, and I've heard a few examples of people that might need to just get in touch with us and have a chat about how their personal circumstances need to be mitigated and supported, then please just get in touch and we can work through that. But for the vast majority of people, you know, it's almost 3 years before these will be fully implemented. There should be time there to adapt, to adjust, and just, you know, to realise that these are, you know, very special spaces, and I appreciate the passion that's been shown. I really do. I do think that activism is something to be celebrated and encouraged, and I do wonder what amazing things your group of activists could achieve on our allotments with that sort of new voice that you've found. But it is an impossible situation to be in local government right now, when we've got you know, household support funds, which we don't know, you know, what is going to happen with that tomorrow, and the consequence that will have to our residents. You know, that we've kept all our libraries open, our council tax reduction scheme is still at 100%. These are not easy things to do, and they are not things that are happening in any other, well, hardly any other council in the country. So I really hope that people can see outside of the allotments and just take on board some of that holistic picture that we're really trying to grapple with. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. Did you have a supplementary to your question?
I suppose only to say, actually, this is really about us being informed and this being a transparent process.
I would encourage you to make it a question, so not taking it from
Sorry,
the next question.
Do you recognise the fact that actually 25% rent increases were passed and weren't actually implemented? That this isn't about 2018. You've already passed that and implemented it. Why not do that now and then look at a wider consultation and a more transparent way of informing that consultation?
Because
simply because of the amount of time that's passed, I think it's we have to reckon with that and recognise that, you know, by the time these will be implemented, it will be around 8 years. You know, it will be 2026 before we get to the proposal that we're at, and it was 2018. So, you know, by that point, that's a significant difference of time. That 25% just won't be enough, and I cannot ask the Parks Service, with the mitigations that they've got to have, to subsidise your private food growing opportunities.
And we've run out of time, but what I will do is let's take one more question. I think it is important to recognise as well. I mean, we talked earlier right about the pressure on parks. Parks are for the whole city as well. And the equality of access to green spaces, quality green spaces, investing in those green spaces is absolutely essential. And if that's being impacted, we do have to look at ways of meeting that need. And our challenge as city leaders is that sometimes we don't get the opportunity to tell people what they want to hear. We tell them about what they need to hear, and we have to talk about the financial context we're in. And that's one that brings incredible pressure onto every aspect of local government activity. And that's where we are today. So we have to find a way of being, of really prioritising and being as fair and just as possible in the face of finite financial resources, in the face of growing need and a growing cost of meeting those needs. And it is a wicked situation for us all. Let me go on to the next questioner, and I will just add this one in just to break our 15-minute rule, but I think it's okay for today. There's so much passion here. Alice Hastie. Christopher Faulkner Gibson, James Martin, Katie Ladbrook. Okay.
Thank you. There's been a lot of talk about how the allotment service is being heavily subsidised by the Parks Service. I'd like to know how you know, because there are no financial accounts since 2022. What is putting us in the red is the £300,000 a year recently vaguely explained expenditure which was pulled up in front of scrutiny last week. This is what's putting us in the red. How do you feel able to pass a decision about this rent increase based on such patchy finances?
So there was two sets of figures that were released, which I agree isn't very particularly helpful. The first set showed you the income and expenditure that is currently going on in the service, and the second set was the income and expenditure that we want to achieve over the next 15 years. I'm not sure why you're shaking your head, but that is what was released. Okay, but so the difference between the two is that that second lot of figures is the maintenance programme. It is what we want to achieve over the next 15 years with investment from the service. In no way, shape or form is the income from the allotment tiers designed to fund that. As you know, you'd be several £100,000 short. That is money that we're going to have to either fund through our capital programme or not, depending on how the committee system decides to deal with that. So that's what those two different sets of figures were for. One is for that current service in which we're managing, which is in decline, going seriously downhill, which no one is satisfied with and no one happy with. The second lot is what we should be aspiring to do if we want to be ambitious and if we want you guys to have some good quality allotments and a good quality service. That's the funding that we needed to do it. You won't be paying for that. You know, you're paying for an additional allotment officer and a tiny bit of maintenance, and that's about what the funding increases will do. The rest will be capital expenditure that will have to be acquired from the rest of the council service in our capital schemes.
Thanks, Eddie. Now, because I added a question there, I won't take a supplementary, but allow me to go to Councillor Chris Jackson. I think you had a question on this, Chris?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm glad the allotment rent rises are being staggered over 2 years to give people time to adapt to change. We also get in the age of the Tories continue to cut our budget. We need rents to rise after they have been frozen for a significant amount of time. Could Councillor King please outline what rents will be spent on?
The allotment, the fees will be to deliver, to bring additional staff into the service, and to carry out maintenance, to bring some of our overgrown plots back into use, to work on community food growing initiatives, to address some of our ecological ambitions with tenants, and to work on our capital programme and to support the rest of the allotment team, who have been much reduced in the last 10 years, and so it will bring a welcome additional support into that service.
Thanks, Eddie. Did you have a supplementary, Chris?
I do have one. It was great to see the discounts for people on benefits, but what would have happened if we wouldn't have put these fees up?
Well, if we didn't put the fees up, we continue to manage a service in decline, as I've said several times. So we would continue to have an increase in overgrown plots that are not tenantable, an increasing waiting times and frustration for people trying to contact allotment officers and not getting a timely response, an increase in maintenance challenges, an increase in risk in some of our paths and walls not being maintained properly, and we would be behind schedule in achieving some of our ambitions around working with allotmenteers to grow for the benefits of nature and wildlife as well.
Thank you very much for your answers.
Thanks, Ellie. Can I have any Cabinet members to comment on this item as well? Don.
Thanks. Yes, I mean, I've managed an allotment site for I think about 15 years now, and I've seen probably 3 generations of allotments officers. move through the system, and in each case, for all that time, actually, they have been caught between legitimate requests and demands from plot holders and an absolutely disastrous resourcing situation, and that's something that we as councillors, I think, feel and recognise how painful a kind of tension that is to find yourself in. We chose it, but I think for officers, they shouldn't expect to have to endure that year after year. We need to make some radical decisions about what our strategy and how we're going to fund it is for our allotments. We know that, I know that many times I've asked for rubbish to be cleared, I've asked for locks to be changed, hedges to be cut, and I know that I'm asking for things that there just isn't money for. We know that it's not being run properly at the moment, and we know this pricing structure does ensure that those who are genuinely disadvantaged don't pay as much as those of us who are fortunate to be waged. Ellie has said that if someone is in a particularly difficult situation, is caught somehow between those rules, then there's scope for a compensation there. But we now must pay a reasonable amount for the use of our allotments. Most of us spend many, many days, weeks, sometimes months of our year in those allotments. It's still incredibly good value compared to other forms of entertainment, which have gone up ridiculously. If you've bought a theatre ticket or a football ticket or something, the prices are extraordinary. You know, the number of days and the amount of attention that my allotment gets makes it the best quality and still the cheapest form of entertainment, and the healthiest, and to my mind, worth every penny. So no one wants to pay more, but I absolutely 100% support what Ellie's doing here, and glad to see it. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. So, Ellie, I'm going to hand back to you in a minute to make a decision which I support, but I think first off, it's important to recognise that you operate within a context too, and it's a context I require, and our budget must be balanced. Right? The consequences for a local authority of not balancing its budget each year are the worst possible outcomes for a place. Just looking at the testimonies that are coming from Nottingham now, which are huge cuts to services that they've just agreed to. Birmingham, huge cuts, while increasing council tax 21% when the outside commissioners coming in. So actually our responsibility to pass a balanced budget is the priority, and everything has to happen within that context. When we faced big financial pressures into last year, talking with Stephen and the senior leadership team and cabinet, what they needed to do was come back with a way of making sure that this organisation can deliver all the things we'd like it to deliver, but do so within that financial envelope to make sure that we don't end up with the commissioners coming in. At the same time, we've made a big drive back supporting the most marginalised communities within the city. We've expanded the number of people who can apply for support with their allotments. If anyone has any issues with the paperwork around that or the application, reach out to us directly, our community development team, your local councillor, and the support will be on hand to make sure people can get that discount if they're financially challenged or if they're a group. And if there are exceptional circumstances, reach out to the team as well, and the team can take those into account. But the other things that we are constantly doing to support people in Bristol, we've retained the council tax reduction scheme. So by definition, those people who are most financially challenged continue to get financial support from the council. That is not an inconsequential sum of money it takes to run that council tax reduction scheme. So again, the competition for a finite resource is real, and obviously the benefits of people getting their council tax reduction, 100% in some cases, spill over into everyday life as well. And we've heard about the work we've done to advocate for the continuation of the household support fund as well. So look, I just want to thank you, Eddie, for standing up, for leading, for trying to navigate through a wicked context with a very challenging financial situation for all of us. And the doors are always open to conversation on this. So let me hand back to you now to take the decision, which I support and which will now be displayed on the screen.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just want to say thank you all for coming as well. I do appreciate your voices on this. It might not be an easy decision, but being a part of an administration during austerity means that a lot of these difficult decisions have to take place, and I do believe this is the right one. In terms of the decision to be made today, I approve the recommendations as set out in the report.
Okay, so I'm just going to refer to the rest of the items. So just for the rest of the time now, we're going to tackle home to school travel, which is a massive financial challenge, particularly for some of our most marginalised kids, at-risk kids. Employment skills and lifelong learning, how we make sure people can participate in the economy of Bristol. Future Bright, we're going to do Working Well, specialist employment support programme for people in Bristol. We're going to look at alternative learning provision framework to cover post-16 special educational needs education. We're looking at our Bristol Holding Limited group company business plans. We're going to be talking about people living in vehicles within Bristol, the precarious situation therein, and the concerns of local residents about the impact that's having on their lifestyles. And we'll also be looking at, oh, it's empty. We'll be looking at the council financial situation.